Hi, my name's Jane Hardwick Collings. I'm a grandma and a mother and a midwife and a teacher of the Women's Mysteries, which is basically what I would like to talk to you about today. I want to basically have a conversation with you that maybe feels a little bit awkward to have with, say, your mum or your school teacher or whoever your equivalent source of female information is, because if you don't have the conversation, then you are making decisions without all the information, and that's not a sensible idea. So I want to talk today with you about the really important things like your body, the menstrual cycle. And our culture today has some pretty weird things going on that put women and girls at the bottom of the list. And that's not the place for us to be. We need to be in equal place at the top of the list. And what I mean by list is the place where the decisions that are made are suiting both you, the young woman, and the young man. But that's actually not the way it works these days, as you well know. So, let me start by talking a bit about the menstrual cycle. And if that makes you go, ooh, yuck, then you need to talk about the menstrual cycle. And you need to understand the menstrual cycle, because how you look after yourself around your menstrual cycle is going to completely run your life. And what I mean by that is how you feel, like energy-wise, emotional, and psychological, and how you feel about your body and what you're prepared to do with your body, what you're not prepared to do with your body, and with who. So it's really where it all starts. So the menstrual cycle is not just about your period. That's a small part of it, like 3 to 5 to 7 days. The rest of the cycle is just as important as that bleeding part, and actually how you look after yourself in the rest of the cycle will impact your experience of your bleeding or your moon time or your blood time, whatever you call it. So you may have heard of the concept of a spiritual practice. So a spiritual practice is something that we regularly do by choice, that we dedicate time and energy to for the betterment of ourselves, for the purpose of choosing a path of healing and wellness. And a spiritual path takes into its considerations more than the physical, but also how that impacts us on a spiritual level, which really means how you operate in the world, how you feel about yourself and your beliefs. So looking at our beliefs and values is how we create our spiritual journey. And mostly the way people, especially women, feel about and care about their menstrual cycle and what that sets up as a spiritual practice, in other words, how that speaks of or shows our beliefs and our values, is not that good. So the thing to know about the menstrual cycle is that it is a spiritual practice, whether you're doing it as a spiritual practice or not. So however you are looking after yourself through your menstrual cycle is your spiritual practice. And what that means is it reinforces how you care for yourself, to identify that as your beliefs and values towards yourself. So it's worth getting right, because otherwise you're reinforcing a negative picture to yourself, which is not a good idea, and results in problems or pathology or pain or irregular cycles or all the things that probably most of your friends are experiencing. So the menstrual cycle runs your life, whether you pay attention to it or not. And how you flow with it, and again, I don't mean just the bleeding time, I mean the whole cycle, is going to help you understand what's going on with your body and therefore how to best flow with that or be with that. And to notice in a biofeedback kind of a way the effects of the way you look after yourself or not, that cycle. So it's the menstrual cycle is a stress sensitive cycle, which means that if your life is stressed, and that could be physically or emotionally or psychologically, then that shows up in your menstrual cycle. So it's like a direct readout of how you've lived and whether you've partied too hard or slept too little or worried too much. That'll all show up in your menstrual cycle. So learning how you go through your menstrual cycle is step one. Now, the way to do that is to chart your menstrual cycle. There's various apps you can use, and also you can just use a pen and paper and a calendar. And I don't mean just mark X's on the days when you bleed. I mean going through each day and noticing the changes. Because, surprise, surprise, or no surprise, surprise, we feel different every day. And that is because every day in the cycle is a different picture or a different story, especially hormonally. And our hormones are not some uninvited, annoying guest. Our hormones are us. So it's not, oh, it's my hormones, it's, oh, it's me, would be the better way to say that. So noticing how different you are every day. Sometimes it'll be really different. Sometimes it's just like the next level or the next upward or downward on the gradient. It helps you to know what affects you in different ways and therefore what you can do about it. So there's 2 halves to the menstrual cycle and 4 weeks to the menstrual cycle. So in the first half, it's from bleeding to ovulation, and ovulation is when you release the egg from your ovary, and that's when you're fertile. For 24 hours, you're fertile, and also there's another piece of time when you're fertile, and we can give you some notes about this to look up, but it's when the moon is in the same phase as it was on the day you were born, you have the potential to ovulate again. It's called your lunar phase return ovulation. So that's worth paying attention to, and may not be the same time as you ovulate in your regular cycle. So for 2 times a month, probably, you are fertile for 24 hours only. So it's not that you are fertile all the time. It's fertile 2 times in the month for 24 hours. Now the thing obviously that we need to consider in this is that sperm lives for 3 to 5 to potentially 7, probably not, 3 to 5 days inside you. So therefore, for contraception, in other words, for not getting pregnant, you need to make sure that you don't have sperm inside you for basically 5 days, let's say a week before each of those potential ovulations. The lunar phase return ovulation and your menstrual cycle ovulation. And then for the 24 hours of the egg's life, because the egg only lives for 24 hours. So you need to find out what phase the moon was on the day you were born and use that in your charting process too. And notice also how you feel on that day. It's like an extra juicy day of potential creativity that you can use. So the idea here is that you work with your menstrual cycle, not struggle with it. That you notice how you feel on any particular day, then you can start planning your life around it. Like, for example, when a woman is ovulating, she is the most articulate, charismatic, and captivating a human being can be. So we can use that. And the way to use that, when you can, is to do things where you need to talk people into whatever it is that you're wanting to talk them into. Perhaps in a work situation it might be presenting a proposal to your workmates or something. Do that when you're ovulating, because when we are ovulating we have people eating out of our hands, because that's the process, that the plan, because it's all about reproduction. So ovulating women are very attractive on every level. So if you need to convince anybody about anything, do it when you're ovulating. And when we're bleeding, we are in a space of deep connection with the earth and with ourselves and very inward. So that would not be the time that you would feel very much like going out and partying. So when you go against what your body's telling you, then it has to do something to remind you that you're going against what your body wants you to do. And what that means is, for example, at the bleeding time, perhaps cramps or pain or maybe even extra blood flow and clots, all with the idea that it's your body giving you a message to whatever you read that as. For example, slow down or rest. One of the things about when we're bleeding is we're usually more tired. And that's not an accident. That's kind of like part of the blueprint and the design so that we will sleep more when we bleed, because magic happens. We actually have, when we bleed, prophetic dreams, which means prophecy. We have dreams of what's to come. And when we use that opportunity and that design of us, then we know what we can be expecting that cycle or even beyond. So the menstrual cycle, remember, is actually something to live by, not to ignore. If you ignore it, it will try its hardest to get your attention. And what I mean by it is your body will do whatever it needs to do to send you a message of imbalance and a requirement for stopping something or doing less of or more of something so that you can get more into a balanced place. So the menstrual cycle is really the place to start with everything to do with being a woman. And it is like actually going through the 4 seasons that the earth does, because we are all as if the earth. And the earth goes through the seasons of spring, summer, autumn, winter, spring, summer, autumn, winter, over and over and over. And each of those, as everybody knows, takes us through the cycle of birth, growth, full bloom, harvest, decay, death, rebirth, growth, full bloom, harvest, decay, death, rebirth, over and over and over and over. So we are as if the earth, and our bodies do that. And everybody's body goes through the seasons, but for a woman, the menstrual cycle is like a reenactment of the earth's seasons within the month or the moon or however long your menstrual cycle is. So we have like a spring in our cycle where we're awakening and seeing the new potential of things, and then a summer when we're like full of energy and wanting to be out there, and then an autumn when we're coming in and noticing the harvest, and then a winter in our cycle when we're wanting to go to rest, to retreat, and to regenerate and renew and recuperate. And then the spring again. So if we look at our menstrual cycle through the lens of the Earth's seasons, it's so much easier to know what we're meant to do. And a big key in this process too, in looking at it like this, is that in week 3 of our cycle and into week 4, so the second half, the time when in the earth we would see the harvest, which is actually the results of whatever you started growing in the beginning of the cycle. And in this case, in the menstrual cycle, what that looks like is however you look after yourself, or not, when you're bleeding, will show up in week 3 and 4 of your menstrual cycle. And it's a well-known phenomenon and has actually been pathologized to the max and given a name, premenstrual syndrome. So actually what that's all about is all of the things that are not working in your life show up at that point in your menstrual cycle, week 3 and week 4, so you can let go of them and not take them into the next cycle to get bigger and worse until you notice them. So what you can do in that case is when you start getting cranky, when your blood is due to come, have a think about what's actually making you cranky. And don't blame anybody else, because it's not about anybody else. It will show up in your relationships with other people, but you can't blame anybody for anything actually, part of what we need to do in this world is take responsibility for ourselves, and step one for women is take responsibility for your menstrual cycle.